Tonight's story takes us to Australia in the summer of 1966, to a popular seaside suburb near the city of Adelaide, where families gathered along the shoreline to enjoy the warmth of the season. It was a time when communities often felt safe, when children were given independence to explore familiar surroundings, and when a short trip to the beach seemed like an ordinary part of childhood. On a national holiday, 3 siblings left their home for what was expected to be a simple outing by the ocean. They never returned. The disappearance of the Beaumont children would become one of the most well-known missing persons cases in Australian history. In the hours after they failed to come home, concern began quietly within their family, before expanding outward into a large search effort involving police, volunteers, and the wider community. Witness reports emerged. Timelines were constructed, and investigators worked to understand what might have happened during the day. Yet despite extensive efforts, certainty remained out of reach. Over the years, the case continued to occupy a place in national memory. It influenced how parents thought about safety, how communities responded to missing children, and how investigations were conducted in the decades that followed. Reports, theories, and renewed inquiries appeared periodically, each offering possibilities but never providing a definitive answer. The passage of time did not diminish interest. Instead, it deepened the sense of mystery surrounding what occurred that day. As you settle in, allow the atmosphere to become calm and steady. This is a story told gently, with attention to confirmed events, witness accounts, and the uncertainty that remains. We will move through the timeline slowly, allowing the details to unfold without urgency. Some questions persist across generations, and tonight we simply follow the story as it exists, resting within memory as the night continues. In the mid-1960s, Adelaide was known as a calm and orderly city, often described as one of the more relaxed urban centres in Australia. Life moved at a steady pace, shaped by routine work schedules, family gatherings, and strong community ties. Suburbs were generally considered safe, and it was common for children to travel short distances independently, particularly within familiar neighbourhoods. The sense of trust within communities reflected both the smaller population of the time and the social expectations that neighbours looked out for one another. Glenelg, located along the coastline just outside the city centre, was one of Adelaide's most popular recreational areas. With its sandy beaches, amusement attractions, and cafes, it attracted families throughout the summer months. The shoreline provided space for swimming, playing, and relaxation, while nearby shops offered food and refreshments. On warm days, especially during holidays, the area could become lively, with visitors arriving by tram, car, or on foot to enjoy the coastal atmosphere. Beach culture held an important place in Australian life during this period. Children often learned to swim from a young age, and outings to the ocean were viewed as both healthy and enjoyable. Parents frequently allowed older children a degree of independence, trusting that familiar public places would remain safe. This cultural norm meant that groups of children traveling without adult supervision were not unusual, particularly during daylight hours in well-known locations. The Glenelg area also had practical advantages that reinforced this sense of security. Public transport connected it easily to surrounding suburbs, and the presence of businesses and crowds created the impression of constant activity. Families could spend entire days there, moving between the beach, nearby parks, and food vendors. The environment felt open and welcoming, which contributed to confidence that children could navigate the space without significant risk. During national holidays such as Australia Day, the atmosphere became even more vibrant. Families gathered in larger numbers, celebrations took place, and the summer heat encouraged people to spend time outdoors near the water. For many households, visiting the beach on such occasions was part of tradition, combining relaxation with a sense of community participation. The presence of crowds was often interpreted as reassurance rather than danger, Within this cultural context, the idea of children visiting Glenelg Beach on their own did not initially raise concern. Parents commonly believed that daylight hours, familiar surroundings, and public activity created a protective environment. The norms of the era supported independence, and children were encouraged to develop confidence by managing small outings themselves. This perspective shaped how families approached decisions about allowing their children to travel short distances without supervision. Adelaide in the 1960s therefore existed within a framework of trust and familiarity. Communities were interconnected, and daily life carried an assumption of safety that influenced behavior. While risks certainly existed, they were not always perceived with the same level of caution that might be present in later decades. This environment would later influence how people interpreted the disappearance, because it contrasted sharply with expectations about safety at the time. Understanding this social and cultural background helps explain why the events that followed had such a profound impact. The disappearance did not occur in a setting widely viewed as dangerous, but in a place associated with family, recreation, and community life. The contrast between expectation and outcome contributed to the lasting significance of the case, shaping how it would be remembered across Australia. At that moment in history, however, Glenelg remained simply a busy seaside destination, filled with families enjoying the warmth of summer. The routines of daily life continued, and nothing about the environment suggested that it would soon become the center of one of the country's most enduring mysteries. The Beaumont family lived in a suburban area of Adelaide, within a household shaped by routine, structure, and close relationships between parents and children. The parents, Jim and Nancy Beaumont, maintained a stable home environment where daily life followed predictable patterns. Work responsibilities, school attendance, and family activities formed the rhythm of their week, much like many other households in the community during that period. Their home was not remarkable in outward appearance, but it represented the consistency and care that parents sought to provide for their children. The three Beaumont children, Jane, Arnna, and Grant, each had their own personalities and interests, reflecting different stages of childhood. Jane, the oldest, was often described as responsible and attentive toward her younger siblings. Arnna, the middle child, shared a close bond with both her older sister and younger brother. Grant, the youngest, was energetic and curious, typical of a child exploring the world with growing independence. Together, they formed a small group that spent much of their time in one another's company, both at home and during outings. Family life included school routines, household tasks, and leisure activities that were common for children of the era. The siblings attended local schools, interacted with neighbors, and participated in activities such as playing outdoors or visiting nearby shops. Their parents encouraged independence appropriate for their ages, allowing them to develop confidence in navigating familiar surroundings. This approach was consistent with broader parenting norms in Australia during the 1960s, where communities were generally perceived as safe for children. The relationship between the children and their parents was described as caring and supportive. Jim Beaumont worked to provide for the household, while Nancy managed many aspects of daily family life. Their parenting approach balanced supervision with trust, reflecting the belief that children could handle small responsibilities when given guidance. Allowing the siblings to travel short distances together was seen as a normal part of growing up, particularly in environments the family considered familiar and secure. The children had previously visited Glenelg Beach and were familiar with the area. This familiarity contributed to their parents' confidence in allowing them to go there without direct supervision on certain occasions. Public transport routes were straightforward, and the destination was well known to the family. The expectation was that the children would follow instructions, return home at the agreed time, and remain within the safe boundaries they understood. Household interactions were shaped by ordinary moments, shared meals, conversations, and preparations for the day ahead. These everyday experiences created a sense of normality that would later stand in contrast to the events that unfolded. Nothing about the family's routines suggested that anything unusual was approaching. Their lives moved forward with the quiet predictability that characterizes many family households. The bond between the siblings also played an important role in how they were perceived. Being together offered a sense of mutual protection and companionship. Parents often felt more comfortable allowing children to travel as a group rather than alone, believing that older siblings would look after younger ones. In the Beaumont household, this dynamic reinforced the decision to permit outings where the children could explore familiar environments together. Community connections added another layer of reassurance. Neighbors recognized the family, and the children were known within their local area. This familiarity contributed to the broader perception of safety that influenced parental decisions. In environments where people recognized one another, the risk of harm was often believed to be lower, even if that perception did not always reflect reality. At this point in time, the Beaumont family existed within the ordinary patterns of suburban life. Their days were structured around work, school, and small moments of enjoyment, with the children gradually gaining independence as they grew. The trust between parents and children, combined with confidence in their community, shaped decisions that seemed entirely reasonable at the time. These everyday details form an important part of the story because they highlight the normality that existed before the disappearance. The family's routines, relationships, and environment were typical for their era, reinforcing how unexpected the events that followed would be. The contrast between ordinary life and sudden uncertainty would soon become central to how the case was understood and remembered. The morning of January 26, 1966, began like many summer holiday mornings in Adelaide. Australia Day was a public holiday, and the atmosphere across the city carried a sense of celebration and relaxation. Families planned outings, children anticipated time outdoors, and the warm weather encouraged trips to beaches and parks. Within the Beaumont household, the day started quietly, following familiar routines before the children began thinking about how they might spend their time. Jane, Arnna, and Grant had discussed the possibility of visiting Glenelg Beach, a destination they already knew well. The beach offered swimming, space to play, and nearby shops where they could buy snacks or small items. Because they had visited before and understood how to travel there, the idea did not initially raise concern. Their parents had previously allowed similar outings, trusting that the children would remain together and return home as instructed. The children approached their mother with a request to go to the beach that morning. Discussions within the household focused on timing, transport, and expectations for their return. Nancy Beaumont considered the request within the context of their ages, the familiarity of the destination, and the public nature of the holiday environment. Eventually, permission was granted with clear instructions about when they should come back. The children were given a small amount of money for bus fares and food, reinforcing the expectation that the outing would be straightforward and routine. Preparations were simple and practical. The children dressed for warm weather, gathered towels, and prepared to leave the house together. Their departure did not carry any unusual tension or concern. Instead, it reflected the independence that children of that era were often encouraged to develop. The understanding was that they would travel by bus, spend time at the beach, and return home later in the day according to the plan discussed with their parents. The morning environment in the neighborhood appeared normal. Other families were also beginning their day, some preparing for celebrations or outings of their own. The sense of safety that characterized suburban life at the time remained present, reinforcing the belief that the children's trip was appropriate. Nothing about the moment suggested that the decision would later become the subject of national attention. As the children left the house, their interactions with family members were typical of any departure for a short outing. Instructions were repeated, reminders were given, and expectations were understood. The siblings traveled together, with Jane naturally taking a guiding role as the oldest. This arrangement provided reassurance to their parents, who believed the children could manage the journey responsibly. Public transport systems connected suburban areas to Glenelg Beach efficiently, and the bus route was familiar to the children. Traveling in daylight hours added another layer of perceived safety, as the journey took place within a busy environment where other passengers were present. The combination of familiarity, routine, and holiday atmosphere contributed to the sense that the outing was uneventful. At this stage of the timeline, there was no indication that anything unusual would occur. The children were simply 3 siblings beginning a day of recreation during a public holiday, moving through ordinary routines shaped by family trust and community norms. Their departure from home was one of countless similar moments experienced by families across Australia that morning. The simplicity of these plans would later stand in contrast to the uncertainty that followed. What began as a routine decision within a loving household would soon become the starting point of a mystery that has endured for decades. Yet in that moment, the focus remained on a day at the beach, with expectations of laughter, play, and a safe return home before evening arrived. After leaving home that morning, Jane, Arnna, and Grant travelled toward Glenelg Beach using public transport as planned. The journey itself was uneventful, taking them from their suburban neighbourhood into the busy coastal area where many families had gathered for Australia Day. By the time they arrived, the beach environment was active, with people swimming, walking along the shoreline, and visiting nearby shops. The atmosphere reflected the holiday mood, filled with movement and conversation rather than anything unusual. Witness accounts later helped establish that the children spent time on the beach during the late morning and early afternoon. Several people recalled seeing them playing in the sand and near the water, behaving like any other group of siblings enjoying a day outdoors. Their presence did not attract particular attention at the time, which was understandable given the number of visitors present. It was only later, after their disappearance became known, that these observations gained significance. One of the more detailed witness accounts involved an adult male who was seen interacting with the children during the day. Observers described the man as being in friendly conversation with them, at times playing and appearing relaxed in their company. The children did not appear distressed or uncomfortable in these interactions, according to the recollections provided later. However, the identity of the individual was never confirmed with certainty, and descriptions varied between witnesses. Other sightings placed the children near shops and food areas within Glenelg, suggesting they had moved between locations during the day. It was reported that they may have purchased food or small items using the money they had been given. These movements were consistent with the independence they had been allowed, and they did not raise concern among those who saw them. The environment remained busy enough that children moving freely between beach and shops was not unusual. At some point during the afternoon, witnesses believed they saw the children leaving the beach area. These observations were less consistent than earlier sightings, and timelines became more difficult to establish precisely. Some accounts suggested they were walking in a particular direction, while others indicated they might have been near transport routes. The lack of certainty about this final period would later complicate the investigation. What remains significant is that there were no confirmed sightings of the children after a certain point in the afternoon. The transition from observed presence to absence occurred quietly, without a clear moment that indicated danger. For investigators, this created challenges in determining where to focus search efforts, as there was no single confirmed location marking their disappearance. The interactions with the unidentified man became a central element of investigative interest because they represented one of the last known connections between the children and another individual. Authorities attempted to gather information about his identity based on witness descriptions, but the limited detail and passage of time made confirmation difficult. Without clear identification, the role of this person remained uncertain. The holiday environment also contributed to investigative complexity. Large numbers of visitors meant that potential witnesses were dispersed across different locations, and many had traveled from outside the immediate area. Tracking down individuals who might have seen the children required time and resources, and memories began to fade as days passed. This combination of factors created gaps in the timeline that were never fully closed. The final confirmed sightings therefore marked a quiet turning point in the story. Up until that moment, the children were simply enjoying a day at the beach, like many others around them. Afterward, uncertainty began to replace observation, and the absence of clear information would shape the investigation that followed. The normal activity of the holiday setting concealed the moment when something changed, leaving investigators to reconstruct events from fragments of memory and incomplete detail. As the afternoon moved toward evening on Australia Day, Nancy Beaumont expected her children to return home around the agreed time. The plan had been simple. They would spend several hours at Glenelg Beach and then travel back using the same bus route they had taken earlier. At first, there was no reason for concern. Delays were possible, particularly on a public holiday when transport schedules could vary and children might become distracted by activities or friends. However, as the expected time passed and the children had still not arrived, a quiet sense of unease began to grow. Nancy waited, watching for any sign of them approaching the house or coming down the street. The minutes stretched longer than anticipated, and the absence became more noticeable. It was not unusual for children to be slightly late, but there was an instinctive awareness that something was not quite right. Concern increased as more time passed without contact. Nancy began making inquiries, checking whether neighbors had seen the children return or whether any messages had been received. None had. The realization that the delay extended beyond a simple timing issue led her to consider the possibility that something unexpected had occurred during the day. The uncertainty created a shift from mild concern to active worry. When Jim Beaumont returned home and learned that the children were still missing, the situation became more urgent. Both parents began considering where the children might be and whether they could have encountered difficulties while traveling. Their first assumption was that something had delayed them rather than anything more serious. The idea that 3 children could simply vanish from a busy public area was difficult to comprehend in that moment. Jim soon decided to travel toward Glenelg himself to look for them. The drive from their home to the beach area was not long, but the journey carried growing anxiety as possibilities were considered. Upon arrival, he began searching the areas where the children had likely spent time, including the beach and surrounding streets. He hoped to find them waiting or to discover that they had simply missed their bus. The search did not produce the reassurance he expected. Jim asked people in the area whether they had seen 3 children matching the description of his sons and daughters. Responses were uncertain, and while some individuals recalled seeing children earlier in the day, no one could confirm their current whereabouts. The absence of clear information deepened concern, shifting the situation from delay to potential emergency. As evening approached, the urgency increased. The parents realized that if the children had intended to return home on their own, they should already have arrived. The possibility that something had prevented them from doing so became unavoidable. Emotional reactions intensified as uncertainty replaced expectation. Fear began to accompany every passing minute. The parents returned home to consider their next steps. Discussions focused on whether to contact authorities and how best to begin a wider search. In situations involving missing children, the decision to involve police often marks the transition from personal concern to formal investigation. For the Beaumont family, that moment arrived as the absence continued without explanation. The shift from ordinary delay to recognized disappearance occurred gradually over those hours. What began as waiting for children to return home evolved into the realization that they were missing. This emotional transition, from expectation to fear, would remain a defining memory for the parents. It marked the beginning of a search that would extend far beyond that evening and into the decades that followed. By the end of the day, the situation had changed completely. 3 children who had left home for a routine outing had not returned, and their parents faced the unsettling reality that something unexpected had happened. The next steps would involve broader involvement from authorities and the community, transforming private worry into a public investigation. As concern deepened into certainty that something was wrong, the Beaumont parents made the decision to contact police authorities. Reporting missing children marked a turning point, shifting the situation from a private family crisis into a formal search effort involving law enforcement and the wider community. At that time, procedures for missing persons cases were less structured than they are today, but the seriousness of 3 children failing to return home prompted immediate attention. Police officers began gathering initial information from parents, focusing on descriptions of the children, clothing, last known plans, and movements. Establishing a timeline was a priority, as investigators needed to determine when and where the children had last been seen. Details about the trip to Glenelg Beach, the bus journey, and the expected return time were recorded carefully. This early stage of investigation relied heavily on family recollection and available witness information. Search efforts quickly centered on the Glenelg area, where the children had spent the day. Officers and volunteers looked along the beach, nearby streets, and public spaces where the siblings might have remained or become lost. Because the location was large and had been busy throughout the holiday, identifying specific areas to focus on proved challenging. Nonetheless, the search continued with urgency, reflecting the hope that the children might still be located nearby. Public transport routes were also considered, as investigators explored whether the children might have boarded the wrong bus or traveled to an unexpected destination. Authorities contacted transport operators and attempted to determine whether anyone matching the children's descriptions had been noticed by drivers or passengers. These inquiries were important because they addressed the possibility that the children had simply become separated from their intended route. As news of the disappearance spread, community involvement increased. Volunteers joined search efforts, walking through parks, streets, and open spaces in the surrounding area. Local residents offered assistance, demonstrating the strong communal response that often occurs when children go missing. The shared goal was to locate the siblings quickly and safely, before darkness or distance complicated the situation further. Police also began contacting hospitals and other institutions to determine whether any unidentified children had been brought in for treatment or assistance. This step reflected the need to consider all possibilities, including accidents or medical emergencies that might have prevented the children from returning home. No matching reports were found, which further deepened the mystery surrounding their disappearance. The early hours of the investigation involved both urgency and uncertainty. Officers worked to gather information while coordinating search resources, but the absence of clear evidence made it difficult to establish direction. Unlike cases where a specific incident is observed, this situation involved a gradual disappearance from a crowded environment, leaving investigators with fragments of information rather than a clear event to examine. Media involvement began soon afterward, as authorities recognized that public awareness could help generate information. Descriptions of the children were shared more widely, encouraging anyone who might have seen them to come forward. This early communication marked the beginning of national attention that would grow significantly in the days that followed. For the parents, the transition from family concern to organized search created both hope and anxiety. The involvement of police and volunteers suggested that help was available, yet the lack of immediate results reinforced the seriousness of the situation. Each hour without new information increased emotional strain, as the possibility of finding the children quickly began to fade. By the end of these early operations, the disappearance had become a full investigation. Authorities, community members, and the family were united in the search. Yet the absence of confirmed sightings after the afternoon left investigators with limited direction. The groundwork established during this period would shape the inquiries that followed, as efforts expanded to include witness interviews, suspect consideration, and broader public appeals. As the investigation moved forward, police began focusing closely on witness accounts to reconstruct the children's movements throughout the day. Because there had been no single confirmed moment when the disappearance occurred, the timeline depended heavily on what people remembered seeing. Investigators spoke with individuals who had been present at Glenelg Beach, nearby shops and transport areas, gathering statements that might help identify the last confirmed point at which the children were seen safely. Several witnesses recalled observing the Beaumont children playing near the shoreline during the late morning hours. These early sightings were considered reliable because they aligned with the expected timeline of the children arriving at the beach after leaving home. Observers described the siblings as relaxed and engaged in normal activities, consistent with children enjoying a holiday outing. At that stage, nothing about their behavior appeared unusual or concerning. Attention then turned to later sightings that placed the children in the company of an unidentified adult male. Witnesses described interactions suggesting familiarity or friendliness, with the man reportedly talking and playing with the children. Descriptions of his appearance varied, which complicated efforts to identify him. Nevertheless, the possibility that the children had spent time with someone outside their family became a significant element of the investigation. Additional reports suggested the children had been seen near shops or food vendors during the afternoon. One account involved a shopkeeper who believed the children had purchased food items, possibly using money that exceeded what their parents had given them. This detail raised questions about whether someone else might have provided additional funds. However, verifying such details proved difficult because memory can be influenced by later information and the passage of time. Investigators attempted to establish a clear sequence of movements by comparing witness statements with known facts, such as bus schedules and distances between locations. This process revealed gaps where the children's whereabouts could not be confirmed with certainty. The absence of consistent observations during these periods created uncertainty about when and where something might have changed. The final reported sightings became particularly important. Some witnesses believed they saw the children leaving the beach area in the company of the unidentified man, while others were less certain about timing or direction. Differences in recollection meant that investigators could not rely on a single definitive account. Instead, they had to consider multiple possibilities while acknowledging that memory can be imperfect, especially when recalling events after the fact. Reconstructing timelines in cases involving busy public spaces presents inherent challenges. Large crowds, overlapping movements, and environmental distractions can reduce the reliability of observations. In this case, the holiday setting meant that many people were present, but only a few could later provide useful information. Even among those who came forward, the details sometimes conflicted, requiring investigators to weigh credibility and consistency carefully. The uncertainty surrounding the unidentified man became one of the most discussed aspects of the case. Authorities attempted to identify him through public appeals, asking anyone who might recognize the description to contact police. Despite these efforts, no confirmed identification was made. Without knowing who he was, investigators could not determine his role, if any, in the children's disappearance. Timeline reconstruction also involved analyzing transport possibilities. Investigators considered whether the children might have traveled away from Glenelg voluntarily or been transported elsewhere. Bus routes, schedules, and travel times were reviewed, but no confirmed evidence placed the children on a specific route after their last known sightings. This lack of confirmation reinforced the gaps in the timeline that remained unresolved. Ultimately, witness accounts provided important but incomplete information. They established that the children were present at the beach during the day, and likely interacted with an adult male, but they did not reveal what happened afterward. The reconstruction process, therefore, clarified certain parts of the timeline, while leaving critical questions unanswered. These uncertainties would continue to influence investigative direction in the years that followed. As the investigation progressed beyond the initial search phase, police began examining potential suspects and persons of interest who might be connected to the disappearance. This stage of inquiry required careful consideration of available evidence while avoiding conclusions that could not be supported. Investigators worked to identify individuals who had been present in relevant locations, had interacted with the children, or whose behavior might warrant closer examination. One of the earliest areas of focus remained the unidentified adult male reportedly seen with the children at Glenelg Beach. Witness descriptions suggested he had engaged them in conversation and play, appearing comfortable in their company. Because he represented one of the last known individuals seen interacting with the siblings, authorities considered him a person of significant interest. However, despite public appeals and investigative efforts, his identity was never confirmed with certainty, leaving an important gap in understanding. Police also explored whether anyone known to the family might have been involved. Investigators reviewed relationships, acquaintances, and routine contacts to determine whether there were connections that could explain the children leaving voluntarily or being persuaded to accompany someone. These inquiries did not reveal evidence pointing toward a known individual, but they formed part of standard investigative procedure in missing children cases. Reports from members of the public generated additional lines of inquiry. Some individuals came forward claiming to have seen the children in different locations or in the company of unfamiliar adults. Each report required assessment to determine credibility and relevance. While some information contributed to broader understanding of possible movements, much of it remained unverified. Distinguishing between useful information and misunderstanding became an ongoing challenge for investigators. At various points, specific individuals were examined more closely due to circumstantial factors or behavioral concerns. In cases where people were identified as potential suspects, authorities conducted interviews and evaluated evidence. However, without physical proof or consistent witness confirmation, investigators were often unable to establish definitive links between these individuals and the disappearance. Over time, some persons of interest were ruled out based on lack of evidence. Investigative direction also involved considering different possible scenarios. Authorities examined whether the children might have been abducted by a stranger, lured away voluntarily, or involved in an incident that occurred outside the public view. Each possibility required different forms of inquiry, from examining transport routes to reviewing reports of suspicious behavior. The absence of clear physical evidence meant that investigators had to explore multiple avenues simultaneously. Public attention and media coverage sometimes influenced investigative focus. When new claims or theories emerged, authorities evaluated whether they contained information that justified further inquiry. While public involvement can assist investigations, it can also introduce speculation that complicates efforts to maintain factual clarity. Police therefore balanced openness to information with the need for evidence-based decision-making. Over time, the investigation expanded beyond the immediate local area. Authorities considered the possibility that the children could have been taken elsewhere, prompting coordination with other jurisdictions when reports suggested potential sightings in different regions. These efforts reflected the seriousness of the case and the commitment to exploring every plausible lead, even when confirmation proved difficult. The investigative process during this stage was shaped by both urgency and limitation. Investigators sought connections that could explain what had happened, yet the lack of definitive evidence restricted their ability to confirm conclusions. The passage of time further complicated matters, as memories faded and potential witnesses became harder to locate. Despite these challenges, authorities continued to examine information carefully, hoping that new details might eventually provide clarity. Ultimately, the focus on suspects and persons of interest highlighted how investigations evolve when certainty is absent. Attention shifts as new information appears, and lines of inquiry develop or close, depending on available evidence. In this case, while several individuals were examined over the years, none could be conclusively linked to the disappearance. The investigative direction therefore remained open, shaped by possibility rather than confirmed resolution. As the disappearance of the Beaumont children became known beyond their immediate community, the response expanded rapidly across Australia. Media coverage played a central role in this shift, with newspapers, radio broadcasts, and television reports sharing photographs and descriptions of the three siblings. The story reached households across the country, transforming what had begun as a local search into a matter of national concern. For many Australians, the idea that 3 children could vanish from a crowded public beach was deeply unsettling. Public appeals encouraged anyone who might have seen the children to contact authorities. This led to a large number of reported sightings and tips, some of which required police to follow up across different regions. Investigators worked to assess the credibility of these reports, recognizing that public awareness could both help and complicate the search. While some information provided potential leads, much of it remained unverified or inconsistent, reflecting the difficulty of relying on memory after the fact. Community involvement became a defining aspect of the response. Volunteers participated in search efforts, distributed information, and supported the family emotionally. The sense of shared concern extended beyond South Australia, with people across the country expressing hope that the children would be found. This collective reaction demonstrated how cases involving missing children can resonate widely, creating empathy even among those with no direct connection to the family. The parents' experience during this period was shaped by both support and uncertainty. On one hand, the national attention meant that many people were looking for their children and offering assistance. On the other, the continuous flow of information created emotional strain, as each reported sighting carried the possibility of hope, followed by disappointment. Maintaining resilience through this cycle required considerable emotional strength. Authorities coordinated search efforts with increasing scope, examining locations beyond Glenelg, where the children might have travelled or been taken. Police communication with other jurisdictions allowed for wider monitoring of potential sightings. Although these efforts demonstrated commitment to the investigation, they also highlighted the absence of confirmed evidence that could narrow the search to a specific direction. The broad geographic possibilities made the task more complex. Media coverage remained persistent, keeping the case visible in public consciousness. Updates were shared whenever new information emerged, ensuring that the children's images were widely recognized. This visibility increased the likelihood that someone might notice relevant details, but it also introduced speculation as theories circulated in public discussion. Authorities attempted to balance transparency with the need to avoid spreading unverified information. The disappearance also prompted reflection on child safety within Australian society. Parents across the country began reconsidering assumptions about independence and supervision, particularly in public spaces. While such reflections developed gradually over time, the immediate impact involved heightened awareness and concern about children travelling alone. The case therefore influenced not only investigative efforts, but also broader social attitudes. Charitable organizations and community groups contributed by assisting with publicity and support efforts. Posters were distributed, and information campaigns encouraged continued vigilance. These activities demonstrated the willingness of individuals and groups to participate in the search, reinforcing the sense that the case had become a shared national concern rather than solely a private tragedy. Despite the extensive public response, the core mystery remained unresolved. The national search generated awareness and engagement, yet it did not produce definitive answers about what had happened to the children. This contrast between widespread effort and lack of resolution contributed to the enduring nature of the case, ensuring that it would remain part of Australia's collective memory. Over time, the public response became part of the story itself. The disappearance was remembered not only for the unanswered questions, but also for the scale of community involvement it inspired. The willingness of strangers to care, search, and hope reflected a broader human connection that extended beyond geography, leaving a lasting impression on those who followed the case. As the years passed without resolution, the disappearance of the Beaumont children remained an open case, periodically returning to public attention through renewed investigative efforts. Authorities revisited evidence, re-examined witness accounts, and considered new information as it emerged. The passage of time introduced both challenges and opportunities, as memories faded, but investigative methods and technologies gradually improved. One aspect of later investigation involved reviewing earlier persons of interest in light of new knowledge. When individuals came to police attention through unrelated matters or new allegations, authorities sometimes assessed whether any connection to the Beaumont case could be established. These reviews required careful comparison between historical records and contemporary information, often without producing definitive links. Nevertheless, they represented continued institutional commitment to the case. Excavation efforts became a significant part of later investigative activity. At different times, locations were identified where authorities believed there might be a possibility of discovering evidence related to the children. These sites were selected based on witness statements, investigative leads, or information provided by individuals claiming knowledge of past events. Excavations required coordination between police, forensic specialists, and local authorities, often attracting media attention due to public interest. In several instances, searches involved digging at properties or areas where suspicions had arisen. The hope was that physical evidence might finally clarify what had happened. However, results did not produce confirmed findings connected to the disappearance. While such outcomes can be disappointing, they are also part of investigative processes, where leads must be examined thoroughly before being ruled out. Advancements in forensic science prompted consideration of whether older evidence might be reanalyzed using modern techniques. In cases where preserved materials exist, new technologies can sometimes reveal information that was previously undetectable. However, the availability and condition of evidence from the 1960s limited the extent to which such methods could be applied. Despite these constraints, authorities remained open to possibilities that future developments might assist. Reviews also included reassessment of witness accounts and timelines. Investigators compared historical statements with later recollections, attempting to identify consistencies or discrepancies that might offer new insight. This process is complex because memory changes over time, and individuals may interpret events differently as years pass. Nonetheless, careful analysis can sometimes highlight overlooked details or clarify earlier misunderstandings. Public interest played a role in prompting renewed attention. Media reports, documentaries, and public appeals occasionally brought forward new information or encouraged witnesses to reconsider what they might have seen decades earlier. Authorities evaluated such information cautiously, recognizing that long-term cases often attract both genuine leads and speculative claims. Distinguishing between them remained essential to maintaining investigative integrity. For the family, each new review or excavation carried emotional weight. Renewed attention meant the possibility of answers, but it also reopened memories of uncertainty and loss. The cycle of hope, followed by continued absence of resolution, became a recurring experience over the decades. Despite this, the persistence of investigative efforts demonstrated that the case had not been forgotten. Institutionally, the disappearance came to represent a long-term unresolved investigation. periodically revisited as new information or resources became available. Law enforcement agencies often maintain such cases in active status, even when progress is limited, to ensure that opportunities for resolution are not missed. The Beaumont case remained within this category, reflecting both its historical significance and the ongoing desire to find answers. Ultimately, later investigations and reviews reinforced the enduring mystery. While efforts were extensive and occasionally renewed public attention, definitive conclusions remained elusive. The combination of time, limited evidence, and uncertain witness information meant that clarity had not yet been achieved. The case therefore continued to exist within the space between investigation and uncertainty, carried forward by both institutional persistence and public memory. Over time, the disappearance of the Beaumont children became more than an unresolved investigation. It evolved into a defining moment within Australian social history, influencing how communities thought about child safety, independence, and risk. In the years following 1966, the case remained present in public awareness through media coverage, discussions, and continued investigative attention. For many Australians, the story marked a shift in perception, altering assumptions about how safe public environments truly were. Before the disappearance, it had been common for children to travel short distances alone, particularly within familiar neighborhoods or public spaces such as beaches and parks. Afterward, many families reconsidered these practices. Parents became more cautious, increasing supervision and limiting unsupervised travel for younger children. While social changes occur for many reasons, the Beaumont case became widely associated with this shift in attitudes, representing a moment when collective confidence in public safety was challenged. The case also influenced policing and investigative approaches. Missing children investigations gradually developed more structured procedures, including faster response times and broader coordination between agencies. Public awareness campaigns and reporting systems improved over the following decades, partly shaped by lessons learned from earlier cases like this one. The disappearance, therefore, contributed indirectly to developments that would affect future investigations. Within Australian culture, the story became part of national memory. Generations who were not alive at the time grew up hearing about the Beaumont children through media, family conversations, and documentaries. The names of the three siblings remained widely recognized, reflecting how unresolved cases can endure within collective consciousness. The emotional impact extended beyond the immediate family, resonating with communities across the country. For the Beaumont parents, the legacy was deeply personal. Their continued advocacy and search for answers demonstrated the enduring bond between parent and child, even across decades of uncertainty. Their determination kept attention focused on the case and ensured that it was not forgotten. This persistence became part of the narrative itself, illustrating how families respond to unresolved loss with resilience and hope. Public empathy remained strong throughout the years. Many people followed developments in the case, hoping that new evidence might eventually provide answers. Community support for the family reflected a shared recognition of the emotional weight carried by unresolved disappearance. The story therefore became not only a mystery, but also a reflection of compassion and solidarity within society. Educational and safety discussions sometimes referenced the case when addressing child protection. Awareness programs emphasized supervision, communication, and safety planning, reinforcing lessons about risk that had become more widely recognized after the disappearance. While such measures developed gradually, the cultural memory of the case contributed to the broader conversation about protecting children. The enduring nature of the story also highlighted how time does not necessarily resolve uncertainty. Even as decades passed, the absence of confirmed answers allowed the case to remain active in public imagination. Each renewed investigation or media report reminded people that the mystery was still open, reinforcing its place in Australian history. The children were remembered not only for what happened, but for what remained unknown. In this way, the legacy extended beyond the immediate tragedy. It shaped social attitudes, influenced institutional practices, and remained part of cultural awareness across generations. The disappearance became a point of reflection about safety, trust, and the fragility of ordinary moments. Its impact reached far beyond the original day at the beach, continuing to resonate long after the events themselves had passed into history. The cultural significance of the Beaumont case therefore rests in both memory and meaning. It represents a moment when assumptions changed, when communities recognized vulnerability in places once considered secure, and when a family's search for answers became part of national consciousness. Even without resolution, the story continues to influence how people think about safety and care for children today. As this story settles into the quiet of the night, what remains most noticeable is the contrast between an ordinary day and the uncertainty that followed. 3 children left home on a warm summer morning, expecting nothing more than time at the beach and a simple return later that afternoon. The routines of family life were familiar and calm, shaped by trust and everyday expectations. Yet somewhere within the flow of that day, something changed, and the absence that followed would never be fully explained. Unresolved cases often leave a different kind of imprint than those with clear conclusions. Without certainty, the mind continues searching, returning to details, possibilities, and memories that remain open. For families, this uncertainty can become part of life itself, carried forward across years and generations. The passage of time may soften some edges of grief, but unanswered questions can remain present in quiet ways, never fully settling into the past. Communities also carry memories of such events. Places that were once simply locations for recreation or daily activity become associated with stories that endure. Glenelg Beach continued to welcome families and visitors, yet for many people, the memory of what happened there remained part of its history. This blending of ordinary life with remembered events is part of how communities process experiences that cannot be easily explained. As you rest, there is no need to search for answers. Some mysteries remain open, not because they demand attention, but because the information needed to resolve them was never fully known. The story can now fade gently into the background, existing as memory rather than immediate concern. The night remains calm, steady, and quiet, holding space for reflection without urgency. Allow the details to drift away now, like distant sounds fading into stillness. The events belong to another time, carried forward only through recollection. In this moment, there is only the rhythm of breathing, the comfort of rest, and the gradual deepening of night. The story settles softly into silence, where questions remain without tension and memory rests peacefully, allowing sleep to come naturally as the night continues.